Thank you for joining us today, Abrar. So today's conversation is going to be around talking about the macroeconomic situation in Pakistan overall, the impact it's having on the startup sector, and just also talking about the agri-tech field specifically, and your advice for aspiring entrepreneurs. So I want to start the conversation by talking about where we are currently, where Pakistan is currently. In the news, we see new news every day about where we are. The rupee is depreciating. We have inflation on the rise. Imports ban again recently. What do you think this macroeconomic situation that we're in, where do you foresee it going, and what impact do you see it having on the startup ecosystem?
So one, I think Pakistan has always had their structural problems, but it has been sort of, the problem has been accentuated by a new government that did not completely have a plan, and now sort of they are struggling with making meaningful decisions that probably have to be anti-populist. As soon as they figure that out, I think we should be back on a good run that we've had in the past few years as far as the macroeconomics are concerned. Once that is sorted, I think what they really need to get a handle on is the US dollar and PKR parity, and whatever ways they use it, whether that's an IMF injection or just figuring out how to reduce our current account deficit. As soon as that is sorted, I think we should be in a good place. We've always had our structural problems, but Pakistan has immense opportunity for lots of businesses, lots of entrepreneurs to really go big. Pakistan is a place where there's inefficiencies are rife, and therefore, as soon as this temporary blip that we're seeing right now, which is a government not really knowing what to do, as soon as that is over, I think there is the potential and the opportunity of Pakistan will very much remain there. And I have no doubt in my mind that entrepreneurs and great startups, great technology companies will continue to do well.
So in these past few years, we've seen startup ideas, entrepreneurs, that's been on a rise, but we've also seen Pakistan's potential of raising investment, Pakistani startups, has been growing exponentially. So do you think with the crisis that we're in, and do you foresee it in the sense that venture capital firms जो हैं वो भी थोड़े से reluctant हो जाएंगे about investing in Pakistani startups? How do you see that?
So two things are happening right now. So there's our local macroeconomic problems, which are more political than anything. And then we have our global macroeconomic problems. So what has happened now is that the global macroeconomic situation has drastically changed over the past 4 months. We've seen over more than 10 years of excess liquidity in the market, where Federal Reserve had very low interest rates, and they were printing a lot of money through their quantitative easing program. And that has led to a very high amount of inflation in the US. And that inflation essentially is something that the government has to control. While people have been talking about overheated markets for a while, I think what has triggered is the Russia-Ukraine conflict has really triggered the markets, and it has triggered commodity prices towards an upwards run. And then I think that's probably the straw that broke the camel's back, and eventually the Federal Reserve has started to increase interest rates, and the money printing operations have stopped, and that has led to a huge crash in the US public equity markets for technology companies, including Netflix. And nobody's been spared of this. Companies are more than 70-80% down off their 52 weeks highs. That essentially this crash is translating into late stage private deals, which are Series G, Series H, Series D, even companies which were raising growth capital. Their valuations have also taken a significant hit, and that eventually is translating into venture capital market also. What this is doing is, three things are happening because of this. One, because now there is limited liquidity in the market. One, it's taking more time for companies to raise money. Two, the valuations are significantly compressed, which essentially means that if you raised at a higher valuation 4 or 5 months ago, 6 months ago, if you need more money now, you probably have to do a down round. You have to raise money at a lower valuation. And three, what it's also leading to is a higher amount of diligence than was performed in the previous years, right? It's not all bad for a lot of companies which are building great businesses, companies which have a lot of cash on their capital or on their balance sheet. They're still doing very well, but a lot of companies which were not in great business areas, or companies which were losing a lot of cash, I think they are going to struggle now, and it's going to get tough.
But I wanted you to take a step back and, we want to hear from you, and I'm sure our audience wants to hear more about your experience personally. So, walk us through when you co-founded Tazah. How did that idea come about? How did you decide to enter the agri-tech field specifically? Because that's one that is still, not a lot of startups have been exploring that. So how did that happen?
So Pakistan's agtech space is significantly behind India. So India is the most comparable market. In India, you have more than 1,000 agtech startups. They've been around for more than 8 to 10 years, and you can sort of chart the course of where Pakistan is going to be 5 years from now. When we started out, of course, our main mission or ambition was that we want to get into a very large market, a very large space. So agriculture is the largest space in Pakistan. It's $60 to $100 billion in size. We also want to get into a complex space where there is like a barrier to success, which is your execution power, right? So if you're executing better, everybody else is going to struggle to sort of come and beat you. And 3, we wanted to do something which was closer to our areas of expertise or the competencies that we had built in our past lives. So while there were multiple problems being solved in Pakistan, agtech still seemed like a problem that still needed a lot more attention. And the space was in its infancy in Pakistan at that point in time. It still is. I mean, there are probably very few proper organized players in the agtech space even today. But I think we've seen a lot more movement or traction in the agtech space over the past 1 year. So we wanted to solve a large, complex, and relevant problem for us. We wanted to build an organization that was mission-driven, which solved for a severe problem in the market, which was in this case, farmers not doing well, farmers not being able, because of their access to market, access to capital, and access to information problem, not doing well. They being locked in a certain socioeconomic class, they being always indebted, in a cycle of debt. So and then essentially a broken supply chain where there was a lot of food wastage and inefficiency. So we want to solve that problem, and that's how we got into the agtech space. And
So considering that this was one space which is far less explored, what are some of the challenges that you faced, and on both ends? So on your ends as a startup, and also on your consumers' end, on the farmers, how did they react to you entering and now proposing this new technology-based solution, which they were of course not familiar with?
I think the challenges have been plenty. One, of course, it's a completely undocumented sector. So when you try to document a sector, and that's probably the problem with most technology spaces in Pakistan, because there is a high amount of tax evasion in the informal sector. So as soon as you try to document a sector, a lot of people spook out because they don't want to be documented, right? And this is a problem that this is one of the reasons most technology companies fail in markets like Pakistan, because nobody wants to be documented. That's something that we've seen. Two, what we've seen is that the current value chain is operated by thousands, actually more hundreds of thousands of micro entrepreneurs. So they're passing the buck from one part to the other. And for an organization to come over and do better than these micro entrepreneurs whose own livelihood is on the line based on the business that they're running, do better than them is actually hard. The promise of technology is that the technology is going to be the actual game changer, where the technology is going to overcome the ownership deficit that a company has. But it takes time for that technology to be built, right? In India, we're seeing that even 6-8 years out, some of these companies have not been able to sort of overcome this deficit, right? So that's a challenge. I think the number 3 challenge is, of course, when you operate in a space where the products are perishable. You have to have a very tight supply chain, and the amount of transparency, the amount of speed that you need to move in the supply chain is super high. This is probably very typical of the agri value chain. You don't see this problem in other spaces. So for us to have that kind of supply chain, it takes time, right? It takes a lot of expertise. There is no playbook. You have to write the playbook yourself. So I think that was one more challenge. But there have been multiple challenges. We've been overcoming one after the other, and of course some of them still remain. But I think what really is important is the resilience that you have to solve some of these problems.
So, Brad, this also gets me wondering that, these farmers and micro entrepreneurs that you're talking about, do you think that they have not had the opportunity to excel, of course, and, and finance is one thing that's really been acting as an impediment which is stopping them from growing further? Do you think that intervention is still needed, or?
Absolutely, it's required. I think a lot of people have been trying. What we've also realized is that to bring that intervention is super hard, right? We've worked very closely with some farmers. We've worked very closely with people who work with farmers. And to solve this problem at scale, which when I say scale, we're talking about 8 to 10 million farmers in Pakistan. Some people say even 14 million farmers in Pakistan. To solve this problem at scale for people who are geographically dispersed, non-homogeneous, people who are also not really in the digital economy, because even today they have feature phones as opposed to smartphones. And people who don't have like a major connect with the outside world, like pure farmers, right? That's the harder part. Even people who are not solving this problem at scale, for example, even these RTs, or when you talk about these agri-input retailers, who probably the closest to farmers, even they have a hard time, especially in the financing business, because the recovery is dependent on so many things which are beyond the RT's control, even beyond the farmer's control sometimes, because the process works such that the farmers need some money to buy agri inputs, for the takeout, and for all these things, and they can only pay back once their crop is harvested and they sell it in the market. First, if the crop goes bad, or the market crashes, like what has happened in the case of potato is the market crashed. What has happened in the case of wheat is that recently is that your yields are really come down. So the farmers don't make money. When they don't make money, they cannot return the money, and that leads to a longer cash cycle for the people who have lent the money. What also happens is that when they harvest and they sell their crops, that is the worst time to sell their crops, because that is when all the harvest is in the market, right? And the government has designed a program which is still not taken off to solve this problem, but they eventually end up not making money. If they don't make money, they cannot return the money that they owe to other people, right? So it is a slightly difficult problem to solve. A lot of people have tried. Banks have been trying with all their firepower, all their manpower, billions of rupees invested in the space, but so far they have not been successful. Indian agri-tech space is still like you still don't know one person who has really solved this through technology, but at scale, right? People have been able to solve this at smaller scales. At maybe when you geographically constrain your market, you could solve this, but at scale through technology is the part that needs to be figured out. But the problem very much remains there. The markets are underfinanced, they're underjuiced. If you juice these markets, they have real potential to go up. But how do you do this at scale is still a question that remains unanswered.
So do you think that more startups, or would you encourage more startups or aspiring entrepreneurs to enter this field and explore the agri-tech field overall? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, there are so many unsolved problems, you maybe even start with better farming practices, right? That's one space. Better input provision, right? The right input provision, the right advisory. Then there are supply chain problems, right? A lot of farmers come to us and ask, what do we grow? How do we maximize our yields? How do we maximize our profitability per acre, right? And while we're figuring out those answers, but this is a core problem to solve. Agri lands, the returns through agriculture are super low, but if you're able to sell that land off, the returns are super high, right? That equation needs to change very quickly. Otherwise, we're going to come to a point where we run out of land which is used for agriculture, and it's mainly used for real estate speculation, which is not where we want to be, because that will eventually threaten our food security problem. Even today, we probably are going to require a lot of wheat to be imported in Pakistan this year, while wheat is the last thing we should be importing, because it is what we grow. It is the largest crop that we have. 25 million tons are produced every year. So I think that equation somebody needs to solve that equation, if not for their own shareholders, but for Pakistan even, because if this equation does not resolve and less and less people get into agriculture, and the land is more used for speculation, real estate speculation, this is not going to end up well for Pakistan. We see the impacts of this in larger cities where earlier on the outskirts of the cities were used for vegetable production, more and more land, more and more of that land is being consumed in housing societies and all, and that's not a great outcome, right? And everybody can see where this is headed, but I think agri entrepreneurs can solve some of these problems. There are finance. So we talked about, you know, what happens at the farm, what happens after the farm. How do you like the question that you asked also, right? How do you provide financing in this space where, you know, financing could really boost the market, right? How do you do that? How do you build warehousing, right? Warehousing is a huge problem, especially specialized warehousing, maize silos, cold storages, right? Specialized warehousing. That could add a lot of value. There are lots of problems to be solved in the agriculture space if people have the resilience. And even if, you know, I'm just not talking about the venture space, right? Because we come from the venture world, we probably have a different set of constraints. But people, even traditionally, there's so much you know, you could do in the agriculture space, even if you come from a traditional. Actually, it's better if you come from a traditional background, because then you have lesser constraints and you have a longer vision to solve.
So do you think that let's say somebody who wants to enter the agri-tech field, do they necessarily need a know-how of, you know, do they need a degree in agriculture? Or because oftentimes people do think that way, you know, हमारे पास ये expertise नहीं है. So what would you say to those people?
I don't think that's required. I think what's required is actually, and that's true for everything, is basically an ability to learn and the ability to apply your mind, right? And the ability, like a very high amount of energy, right? That's all you need. You want to get into it, you have resilience, you want to spend time in it, you can learn anything, right? I don't think that that degree or that formal education or that pedigree for some other reason can be a barrier or is a barrier. It's always your own ability to learn and ability to apply yourself and high amount of energy that actually solves problems.
So what do you think is stopping all these entrepreneurs? We see fintech is growing great, edtech is doing great, you know, new companies are on the rise. Why do we see agri-tech, which is our main sector over here in Pakistan, why is that still lacking?
I've spent some time, like for the past 1 year, we've been interacting with a lot of agri entrepreneurs. I think what's really lacking today is the risk appetite. We are on the other side of the spectrum. We have very high risk appetite, right? We people on the venture side of the business, we've worked with companies like Swvl and Careem, where we've developed a lot of risk appetite. What I've seen, this is my personal view, that, you know, the people that we interact with mostly in the ag space have very low risk appetite. Probably what's not required, you know, the high amount of risk appetite that we have is probably also not required. Probably you need somebody who's somewhere in the middle. But what I generally come across is people who are less ambitious, who probably want to do very little in like a long amount of time. I think there is a clear space for people who really put themselves out there, throw everything that they got at these problems and try to go big. And even if they fail, you know, there's so much learning. So eventually it's what you learn.
With that, my last question to you is what advice would you have for somebody who is now, you know, watching this and thinking that, okay, maybe this is something that I'm going to explore?
I think just read up, but just not read up, actually go to the field, talk to farmers, talk to agri retailers, talk to artis, talk to agri, you know, final retailers who sell agri produce. Try to understand the problems. Just don't go after the theoretical problems, because there are so many. Even if you read books, if you read the newspapers, you're going to come across, you know, oh, this is such a large problem. But in a lot of these cases, a lot of these people who write these articles or these books have actually not done agri, you know, businesses. The situation on ground is sometimes very different from what you read. So it's very important to talk to these people, right? Once you start talking to these people, you build a hypothesis, talk to people, either you validate it or either you disprove it. But, you know, that process has to happen before you actually really jump into actually solving some of these problems. Before that, validate your hypothesis, and you will find some problems, and then you go after them. But important to do a lot of research before you get into it.
Thank you so much for your time, Abrar, and thank you for everybody watching. Abrar is on board with us as a mentor, so if you're looking to sign up for one-on-one mentorship sessions with us, do reach out to us. Thank you.